Okay, welcome to the inaugural call of 2022 for the Technical Working Group for the membership proposal. This is Thursday, 6th of January. And I'd like to introduce everyone to, well, there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is we have a new engagement consultant on OpenActive. Welcome, Tim Corby, previously of Kent Sport, now with the Open Data Institute and OpenActive. Bad news is there's two Tims now, so I expect that we'll have plenty of confusion on this and other calls, but we'll struggle on somehow. So welcome, Tim. And if I go around the screen in the order in which you appear on my screen, if I can just ask you to introduce yourselves for the sake of the call and for Tim, starting with Matt.
Matthew Davies, sports league and venue management software, working mostly with Replay Football to help with their open booking integration.
Debbie.
Debbie Giordano, Everyone Active.
Stephen.
Stephen Winfield, GLL.
And finally, Nick.
Hello, Nick Evans from I'm In.
Okay, thank you very much. Dramatic silhouette introduction there from Nick. Okay, so I will start sharing my screen with the presentation shortly. For those of you who saw the agenda I attached yesterday, there's been a couple of minor tweaks and changes since then, nothing very big. And the good news is, actually, I don't think we've got too much to address on this call. There's a few issues that we want to look at, and sometimes these issues explode in complexity, but by and large, the finish line for the marathon seems to be more or less in sight. So we've got a few things to tidy up, and then I think there's a job for Nick and I to actually get the specification into a single document that's easy to read without corrections all over it. And then it's for us to circulate that back to all you. Make sure we can get all of you to sign that off, and then we can actually move this into an actionable specification. But rather than get too far ahead of myself, we are, of course, discussing the membership proposal with the link that is given there. On the previous call, at the end of 2021, we had a bit of an update about requirements from MCR Active and details capture that were needed in the case of dependent booking. We went through sections 7 and 8 on display of entitlement pricing and booking through a customer account, respectively, as well as appendices E and F, which relate to those two sections. So we crossed those off the list. There were, however, a couple of lingering issues. Before we move into those lingering issues, however, I just wanted to ask the group if there'd been any reflections or meditations through the holiday period that made you think, oh, wait, hold on, what about topic X, problem Y? So were there any fires or fears that we need to add to the agenda at this point? I see Matt shaking his head. Stephen, I'm dreading what you're about to say.
No, I have to confess, I didn't give it much thought, if I'm honest.
Okay.
So no comment from me at this stage.
Okay, good. And now you're coming to it fresh then, I guess, is the other way of looking at it. You managed to clear your head. Debbie, any thoughts from you?
Same. Sorry, it's the last thing on my mind over Christmas.
What? I'm shocked. Okay, starting with a bit of a blank slate then. I think in terms of updates, there was a bit of a requirements question that arose on the last call to deal with cases where facilities were charged on a per participant basis. So a badminton court where each person who played was charged rather than a single price being associated with the facility. And I think it wasn't entirely clear the extent to which Gladstone systems already support this or mean to support this and how widespread that practice was. So I think mostly at Debbie and Nick. Are there any updates to be had here? Or is that more or less on hold?
I can say that there's a review happening at the moment of Gladstone's specification for the work that includes this as part of that. So it might well be that that comes out of the conversations that are happening, I think, next week on Wednesday.
Next Wednesday, okay.
Unless Debbie's got any other updates.
No, but I'm not aware of that meeting next week on Wednesday.
Oh.
And I'm wondering why I'm not aware of that meeting next week on Wednesday.
I don't know. Let me tell you. I'm sure you're on the invite list, Debbie. You are on the invite list. So
Do you mean the one in the morning? That's specifically for Westminster?
Yes, I do. Yes. So because the
Okay.
question was about whether Gladstone can support the facility booking, all the facility booking options.
Yeah, it is, but I'm not sure that should be brought up on that meeting because that's specifically about the Westminster project. If we're talking about the overall solution, I think that should be discussed outside of those meetings with those particular clients.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
Well, as far as the Gladstone products go, then through +2 you can do this functionality. I don't believe it's possible through Connect or the app at the moment. So that's their online solutions, but fundamentally you can configure it in that way in +2.
That's interesting. I don't know if we talked about it last time. So it's not in Connect or the app at the moment.
I don't believe so because you can't book into somebody else's activity. You can't log in yourself and book yourself into somebody else's activity.
Might be why it's not come up yet. How should we bottom this out then, if not on Wednesday? What's the best way of because it sounds like it's a case of if it's not currently possible in Connect, then I guess anyone that can book online presently won't be able to use this configuration.
You'll be able to make the initial booking, but not book any additional people into it,
right,
as it stands at the moment online.
Sure, which I guess is probably what will then, I imagine, be coming through to the open data feeds. If was the question I put on the analysis, which whenever it gets discussed with on the Westminster stuff, was it looks from what Gladstone have said like they do support it coming out of the feeds and making bookings. So my question was, well, what exactly are they supporting? Because it sounds like we're saying that it's not all there, but that sounds like that might be the answer, though. What you're saying there, it's coming out of the feeds. It's just that you can only book one person in.
Okay, yeah, I feel like some of these things probably need to be raised away from the clients still. And so does that mean that we need to go through that whole document, myself and you and Gladstone, and just refine exactly what's being included, what's not included before we have those discussions in front of the clients?
Yeah, we could definitely do that. That's a good idea, and make sure that we've got all our ducks in a row on what's what beforehand. Yeah, totally. I'll suggest that to Nish now, because he's got a call with Kareem later. Okay. Sorry, this is for everyone else on the call. This is totally not. It's totally separate. But yes, that's a good idea. If you're up for that, Debbie, and you think Gladstone will be.
Yes, I've just not been made aware of whether Andy Gordon's back yet, unfortunately.
Okay, sure. Sounds good. We can always use Wednesday to explain that process to everybody, so they know what's happening.
Okay.
I'm trying to think how this fits in the larger pattern of work, because this feels in any events a bit like an edge case, that this isn't something that should be a blocker for the remainder of the membership proposal going through. So I think what I'll do is I'll add this to the agenda for the W3C call, the higher level W3C call, as a requirements kind of canvassing option. Unless it emerges as a really central concern for people on that call, I think I'd be tempted to say this needs to be an issue attached to the booking spec that can proceed more or less independently of these conversations. Is that fair for the present?
If the spec outlines that it's a an out of scope piece at the moment, then
Sure, yeah.
is that not acceptable for now?
Okay, yeah, I'll just take a note of that, that we highlight that should be considered out of scope for the moment. Yeah. Okay, I'll do those things then, get that on the W3C agenda, and also add a note that explicitly out of scope, pending further developments. There's also been there's been a bit of a discussion that seems a little bit parked right now on minimum customer age. So this is not the age of the person who's actually attending, but the person who's actually making the booking. Is everybody seeing a GitHub issue right now? Okay, great. So, and it seems like there's actually two concerns here. One of which is the minimum age of the customer who's making the booking, and then also the age of the person attending determines whether or not there need to be emergency contact details supplied. Nick, I had a hard time, I didn't actually quite understand what was being proposed here. Is the proposal that we add a couple of properties essentially to the opportunity spec?
Yeah, that's right. To the opportunity or booking spec, wherever. But yeah, so in the feeds, it would be possible to specify the minimum age for emergency contact details, and also for what bookable at all, which is the first bit there.
Debbie, you need to go on mute. We keep hear you tapping away. Thanks.
Although the WPM sounds impressive, but
characters coming out.
Right, so it's as simple as specifying in the feeds, yeah, what those ages are. Or well, sorry, so it's the minimum age of the customer is specified as an age, and the assumption is that the seller would have one age that would apply to all opportunities. That would just be a policy on their part.
Yeah, so one is exactly, so the seller policy is based on whatever legal framework they're using. So 13 maybe, or 8, or whatever the number is, people that can make a booking on their own. But the attendee emergency contact required thing, that's dependent on their own policy for when emergency contact details are needed. So this is proposing that for those offers that require emergency contact details, such as junior offers, that's just specified. So if you can imagine, if you're doing a guest checkout, you're going to do a checkout, and there's a drop down that says adult junior concession. If you choose the junior option, you then need to enter emergency contact details. If you choose the adult option, you don't. That's
right. So that's just a Boolean attached to the offer then, true, false. I guess that would work unless it's the case that there's junior banding covers 8 to 14. Emergency contacts are needed for 12 and under or something. Then you'd have a mismatch there.
Wasn't there another case, Nick, where we were saying that a parent record should be created as well?
That's right.
That's two. Go on.
Well, sorry. So the parent record is separate. That's the kind of customer account membership side of stuff. So if you, that's about, what's the way of saying this? If Tim, if you scroll up a little bit, this minimum age a customer can make a booking age, if the customer is younger than that age, then they'll need to have an adult record.
Yeah.
And that's because if this is the age that you need to be the primary person. So if you're not old enough to be the primary person, then that implies you need to be the secondary, whatever, dependent account of some other primary person. And then that forces you down that route of family registration or whatever.
That's different to emergency contact details, isn't it?
Yeah.
As long as that's captured, that's all. Making sure that we've got a few. I think we'd said this sort of 3 scenarios, isn't there? There's you're below a certain age, therefore you need to create a parent record and provide emergency contact details possibly. Then there's a second one, which is you're within a certain age and you only need to provide emergency contact details, no parent record, and then over an age you'd considered fine to carry on without either.
Yeah,
right. And I think that proposal captures that. It's just that the scenario where age isn't a problem isn't explicitly covered here. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, I guess that just leaves me with a concern about the Boolean here. Is that a problem, I guess, is the question. Will we end up with that kind of, does it make sense to attach emergency contact requirements to an offer rather than more generally at the level of the account or the event?
It's a good question. So for guest checkout, which is the focus of this, there isn't any notion of an age outside of the offer.
Right, okay.
Because that's the place where someone says, you don't say I'm 12, you say I'm a junior and I fit within this age bracket.
Right.
And therefore the bracketing is what gives you the need for emergency contact details.
Oh, sorry, yes, of course, yes, attendee, right. There's not really any, yeah.
And so within but where you've got an account or you've got a customer account, that's different, because if you've got a customer account, then
right, yeah,
we've got the emergency contact details anyway. You've got a full-blown account, so it's easy. It's the guest booking situation that was difficult, because with guest bookings you don't have the two accounts linked. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, okay, yes, I see your point. So there's not really anywhere else you could do this, and there's not really anywhere else where anybody would have an incentive to provide those details. Right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that seems very sensible then, given that attendee restriction. Nick, is there anything you'd like to add with regard to this issue?
No, if that sounds good to everyone, that's good. Yeah, I think that yeah, I think it does what Debbie was talking about. Hopefully, it does it quite simply and doesn't require much effort from anyone. So, yeah.
Okay, so can we consider this resolved? Matt, Stephen, any thoughts? Okay, hooray, a check mark.
Great.
Fantastic. Now, on the last call, we also opened up, I think, a rather extensive discussion regarding how we handle dependent accounts, typically parents and children relationships, a lot not restricted to that. Also possibilities of organizations being the primary account holder and so on and so forth. And to summarize very succinctly, this created all sorts of difficulties about how you group different accounts together, and which should be considered primary, which should be considered dependents, and so on and so forth. And the proposal was to actually treat this, to simplify this in many respects, by treating this as basically a broker issue that the broker has to straighten out, and to do this using auth keys. I don't know, there was an action to raise this as a GitHub issue for discussion to continue on there. We can certainly pick this up again on this call. We do have a fairly open agenda, but I'm not sure this is the most productive forum to explore those complexities and unpick them, just because it's a bit involved.
Yeah, I guess I can. So I was supposed to raise that issue. That was the action on me, and I have not done that. What I have done is brain dumped a bunch of stuff off the back of what we discussed last time and what simplifications could look like. I think what it comes down to, which might be the thing to just check with everybody, if there's a comfort around this, is it all just there's a lot of really complicated stuff going on in the dependent accounts stuff that we've talked about, and I was trying to figure out where the complexity was coming from. I think Matt last time raised a really good example of where we could simplify this by just creating permissions individually rather than groups. And that approach really solves a lot of problems whole across the board. But it creates a whole new bunch of problems because there's a kind of combinatorial explosion of directions of permissions that exist then. And so, but I guess the question I had was why? And so, what is it that why are we caring about these permissions so much? And so, what I was going to ask was if people feel comfortable with the idea that the broker is given access to book anyone, whether so what I mean by that is, if a customer account is created by a broker or has given permission to a broker to make bookings, so let's say that I've logged in, I've connected to MCR Active, and I'm connected. Now, a really simple way to solve this problem that makes everything cheaper, easier, and less complicated is if we then said, okay, now I've logged in with MCR and I've said, yes, you can make bookings on my behalf, that actually also anyone else who's using MCR Active could make bookings on my behalf as well. So that means that if you're another user, let's say that my partner decided to log on and wanted to make bookings on my behalf. As long as MCR was happy that between us, me and my partner had given permissions, so that was fine. From an API perspective, those calls can be made, crack on. There's no restriction. And so the restrictions, basically what we're saying is you just totally trust the broker to make the decision about who can make bookings for who. And we don't try and replicate all that complexity inside the booking system. And so it's just up to the broker to figure out what those connections are. So any groups within the broker. What that does mean is those groups won't be replicated in the booking system necessarily. So if they log into Legend or whatever, Gladstone directly, they won't see those links necessarily because those links won't exist because they don't exist anywhere. So that's a strength, because what that means is that if let's say the groups, because we talked about WhatsApp groups, we talked about primary dependence, we talked about all different models. If the model is different between MCR and the booking system, then that's fine, because then there's no attempt to try and keep those both in sync. They're just totally separate things. And so I guess it was just that question of, is there any reason we need to keep these things in sync? If we're happy to say, what, we trust MCR as a broker, or whoever they are as a broker, to enforce permissions on who can book for who as part of what they're doing. And we don't need that to be replicated inside of Flow or Gladstone, because frankly, if someone wants to add a dependent in Flow or Gladstone, they can do that separately through the whatever processes exist in Flow or Gladstone. And that's a totally separate, world of things, and payment details and things can be associated, or whatever the different rules are can be associated. So it just stops us trying to standardize all of this and basically keeps it really, really simple. Does that make any sense? First of all, sorry, I'm trying to explain that.
That makes sense to me, Nick. But the question I'd have is that the ambition of the client? Because I always thought the client, MCR client, wanted everything to be in sync and linked and joined up. I support it. I think it simplifies everything, and I really think it makes it easier for us and the broker. But is that really MCR Active's ambition?
That's a good question. I think from MCR Active's point of view, we definitely need to put this question to them directly. But from their point of view, I think previous conversations have been around making sure the MCR Active experience was whatever it needed to be.
Yeah, and listen, I'd support that approach if we put it to the client.
Okay.
So I think it does simplify everything.
Yeah, I feel like it's hard to have the conversation with this group of people because, yeah, we're making a decision about shift the complexity onto the person who's not here. Great. And yeah, so if we, again, this might be a topic for the next W3C call on Wednesday, maybe, about how we approach that, whether that's acceptable to clients like MCR Active. Are there any other examples of organizations we could engage on that?
in terms of having the complex and the MCR
Well,
active
yeah,
side.
I guess active Westminster, but yeah, okay.
But I suppose is it a question of thinking about use cases? What are the use cases where we would imagine them wanting to control the groups that we're talking about within the system? Because the main thing, it seems, that we want to be able to enable is for all these third parties that are motivating people to get active, to be able to make bookings using whatever, existing discounts are available, or whatever local activities are available. So it's kind of that ability to have that one-stop shop, whatever your fitness needs are, in loads of different ways. And so I'm trying to imagine a use case where we want to replicate those groups across both systems, and that's kind of a thing that the broker really cares about. Because the other thing is that there might well be links that exist with users within the broker side that don't exist within the booking system side. In
terms of use cases, as a user, the only one I guess I would potentially be confused or annoyed at is if you had already gone through whatever is necessary on the booking system side to set up groups whereby you can book on behalf of somebody else, then you go and connect your account, and then you think, well, now I'll book on behalf of blah, but you can't, because you now need to do that again in the broker system. Then that's a problem. But to be honest, I also think this is a very, very small percentage of the use case it's going to be. So I think it's counterproductive to spec out to the nth degree what needs to happen here. And your simple case there is definitely one that I would agree with as well.
Yes, I suppose that's it exactly, because when we position this to the client, I suppose, or to any of these front end brokers rather than a particular client, it's a question of, do you want kind of as much, you can do anything you want, you can use any model you want, or you need to have a really rigorously defined model that matches exactly this thing, and everything needs to work like this, and it only works like that in order for these syncs to work. It might
be completely different from booking system to booking system, so almost impossible to manage.
That's just it exactly. So the further into it we went, the more we realized that the variance could increase in lots of different directions. And the other thing is there's a synchronization problem that you get, because if we try and do the sync, then let's say you connect to two booking systems and they both have different dependents in them. How do we reconcile that? One's already got two kids in, the other one's got the partner in. Then we need to, and maybe they've got different names in different systems, so it gets really hairy. Whereas if all we're really trying to do is identify what accounts, which account is which, and then link them, then that's easier potentially.
And the only other caveat I would say is that as long as payment is going to remain out of scope almost always, because otherwise that's the only other potential problem, isn't it? That you book on behalf of somebody who then has to pay. But obviously at the moment that would never be the case, because payment is out of scope and the broker's handling that, so that's all good. But just in case later on that creeps in and this is still there, then there's a loophole.
Although that, to be fair, if we brought payment in scope, there's all manner of
exactly. Leave that can of worms unopened.
Totally. Debbie, do you have any thoughts on this from everyone actor's perspective?
I guess the only thing that springs to mind is from a user perspective, if they knew that they were already associated with those individuals in an everyone active world or a DLL world, they've also got to associate themselves separately in the MCR platform. How much of a pain is that? Because they're doing them separately, because one's not relying on the other anymore. And would they have any expectation that if they disassociated themselves with somebody in the MCR world, would they expect that they would be disassociated in the operating system as well? And if they're not, how much upset could that cause to an individual that if we were to say still contact them about somebody that is no longer associated to them in MCR, but they are in our system. It's just about them not being synced. I think that'd just be my concerns.
Is it
And data protection, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point, actually. I don't know, is it worth us including some type of flag so that we can notify the user that there are already connections that exist on the account, but they need to log into the booking system to remove them? I don't know. I'm thinking.
Yeah, I mean, they wouldn't be able to remove them themselves at the moment as it stands with the Gladstone software. I don't know about the Legend software. It would be about them contacting us or contacting GLL or the centre, the centre that they're specifically associated to, I guess.
Yes, of course.
But I suppose it may just be something to say that that the action they're taking only impacts the information stored for MCR active.
Yeah. So that's more of a guidance note on the actual way that it's presented to the user.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I feel like the most complex scenario is probably when you've got an organization having the primary account, so to speak. But even in that scenario, I would anticipate you'd almost expect, or you'd almost want to be explicitly recreating those kinds of connections on the client side. It doesn't seem unreasonable that if you're associated with like 30 kids, that you have to restate that in the client. I'm trying to think if there's the GDPR and kind of safeguarding concerns, but I don't think there's anything that hasn't already been canvassed there.
As long as I don't know how you're considering associating people with each other. What methods are you looking at to do that? I know that the Gladstone software and the solution that they're looking at for booking on behalf of associated records is down to that record already being associated to somebody else within the database. It's not them being able to go off and associate themselves with somebody, which I think you're proposing here. And it's how would that work? What does that look like? Because obviously you can't do something like, well, just put a name in here and then we'll return you all the possible options that you can choose to associate with yourself. That's just not an option. So it's how is that going to happen? How is that association being created from one person to another?
Yeah, so there's so on the journey to try and simplify this, one of the things I came across was invites, and sending invites and someone else says yes, you accept it and that kind of thing. So it might be that that's how the broker, MCR sends an invite to so and so who's also got an MCR account, and then they link it if they accept the invite. Yeah,
Gladstone have done something similar for their kiosks, but not for anything else. They call it booking buddies. The kiosks, a bit too cute, but yeah, it's the same sort of behaviour, but you can almost only do it on the kiosk. It's completely isolated to that solution.
So, sir, how does that work with kids? Because children might not have an email account.
On the kiosk, it's all about you having to log into the kiosk, and when you log in, you get notification of any requests that you've been sent to be a booking buddy for somebody.
Right. Okay.
So that's how it works in their world. I mean, we don't actively use it. I just know it's something that exists.
So, well, yeah, I guess if Gladstone's got book on behalf of and booking buddies as two separate things, that might be another point in the box of us not trying to copy or sync everything. Yeah, although the point you just made there, Tim, that's a really good point to jump to, which is that there is something else in what I just mentioned as an approach that we would need to think about to make it work, which is for kids where you've created an account for the kid, for like 2-year-olds, etc., who don't have any autonomy on any system. For that use case, we'd still need the ability to create the account and have it associated with a primary, just because without associating it with a primary, then it's effectively just floating in the ether. There's nowhere of it. It doesn't exist anywhere. So you need to have some association. So we might still need a very, very straightforward kind of creating a dependent account within one of the people that have connected. And I mean that what that really means is that dependent account that gets created, that individual user, they get created as a dependent of that primary, but then that they've given implicitly permission to the broker to make bookings. So as soon as they're created, there's, in terms of permissions, there's no problem because they exist. The broker has control over who can make the bookings. So if you know you've got 2 parents and a nanny, they can all make bookings through the broker fine, because they've got implicit permission to do that. It just needs somewhere for that child to hang off, if you like, so that it can exist.
Right. I guess the hard bit is you might want to transfer or remove that permission. So nanny moves on, nanny can no longer do that. That's just complexity that sits with the broker now.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the two potential options there are either that the that no, you're right, that doesn't work, does it? Okay, I was going to say what I'd written here was that you could have that existing in the booking system, so that the booking system, the only thing that was regulating the booking system was this dependent relationship. Everything else is not. But that is a very strange, the reason I said maybe that doesn't work is that's a very strange kind of, like, some stuff's in the booking system, but not all stuff.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
Really feel intuitive, does it? If you're the user, I've kind of done some of the things I've set up have come through, but the other bits haven't. So
yeah,
maybe,
I mean,
yeah.
The complexity that gets created by syncing, is it really just that you get an explosion of API calls? Is that sort of what that manifests as?
Yes. If you're well, if we're going back to syncing the whole thing, if we sync everything, then you've got the model matching that needs to happen, so that a group, we've created an abstraction of a group that works for all possible scenarios, or as many as possible that we can think of. And that's one issue. We started with that, and then we went to maybe actually we just need to model individual permissions. But if we do that, there's a combinatorial explosion of permissions across all the different people that need to, and then you need to be able to add and remove those permissions, and who's got permissions to remove the permissions, depending on where you are in the group. And then are we over modeling? Are we trying to put too much in the model from the domain when we don't know, because it might change depending on the system. So then you end up in this, well, maybe we don't need to have permissions at all. One goes away in the steps.
But you get a sort of bag on the side of, except in the one case of dependent accounts that do not have an independent existence.
Well, the other thing we could do there, which might be an option, is that those dependent accounts are created but just exist. They don't link to anything, and so they're created by the broker, and the broker MCR creates that account. That account exists. What that does mean is that if MCR created Little Johnny and Westminster created Little Johnny, there'll be 2 Little Johnnies, 2 years old. Because there's no way of getting them anywhere. The other option is that we do provide a transfer mechanism, and we try and manage that with the user, so they understand that Little Johnny needs a parent, needs one primary to be linked to, and that primary is maybe explained somewhere. So that then, because if Little Johnny has a primary, then when that primary logs in to Westminster, we can pull Johnny through, and then what's what. But he doesn't have autonomy to be anywhere else, so you almost have to have him connected to something.
Yeah.
But not for the sake of permissions, just for the sake of access.
Yeah. Yeah.
In terms of the permissions, Nick, does it does it need all that permission stuff? If we do like a superset of what you're suggesting, which is to say that the broker is entirely trusted, then the broker can make bookings on behalf of whoever they want, or whatever that rule is. But then also the broker tells the booking systems when it is creating some sort of, I'm allowing this user to book on behalf, the broker, am allowing this user to book on behalf of this user. Here you go, here's information. And then I, as a broker, am now removing that link that I have in my system. Here you go, booking system, do with it what you wish. The booking system can choose to ignore that or update their own internal model of groups of people booking on behalf of other people. And then there doesn't, I don't see why then the combinatorial explosion occurs, because we're not keeping track of permissions of any passing permissions across other than can book on behalf of this person.
That's interesting. Yeah. So part of the reason the combinatorial explosion occurs is because you only, if you assume that you only have the rights through your API key as one particular customer to edit permissions relating to you, then you have to go through every API key in the group and tell each of the people what they can see, basically, in the imaginary group. But if we say that there's the booking system is the broker's totally trusted, then we don't need the API keys. We can just, it's a series of statements, really. These people can all see each other, which could be useful, but interestingly doesn't solve our dependent problem, does it? Dependent problem is, if I go into MCR and create little Johnny as my son, and then I go into Westminster and log in, can I see Johnny, or do I create another Johnny? And that can only be solved by having an explicit link between Johnny and,
which is possibly a slightly different question than this, if it's as in the question of dependence in terms of it, and that being parent-child relationship is different from whether somebody can book on behalf of another person. Yeah. So there may very well need to be a different set of API calls to say, okay, this is this person, this is a child of this person. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the difficulty is that's kind of the most frequent use case, isn't it? The parent for child, and then a large number of those are going to be people who can't hold an independent account.
Well, so I guess so. It sounds like there's what Matt was saying. There's an interesting idea about permissions, and we can have those shared, and that could be useful, but doesn't actually solve the dependence problem, which is a different issue. And permissions is more kind of solving the potential sync issue, or a way of helping the booking system to display some of that stuff if it was interesting to do that. So it sounds like that might be it might be useful, but maybe secondary if the client doesn't mind, or we can't think of any use cases where that's actually that important to have the syncing. So on the dependent side, if there's always a case where we need to have a primary dependent relationship, not for permissions, just because of that, then like Matt's saying, maybe that's just something we just do that. That's just how it is. And maybe, I suppose then the question is, do we have it so that you can only have one primary, like every dependent needs to be associated with only one primary, and then we need to transfer them and things like that, which might be the simplest way to do it, because it's probably the most compatible with a broad range of options. And then we just need to MCR or Westminster. Like if you let's say that you're a parent and you remove your partner from the account, but Johnny is associated with your partner, it just needs a message to tell that parent that Johnny's going to disappear as well. Do you want to keep Johnny? I mean, gosh, this is it's difficult, isn't it? Because we're modeling a real world scenario, which is a pretty difficult one. But that's what that is, isn't it? So we're going to need to then have a question of, does Johnny move to the other account, and who can make that, who can do that?
Does Johnny move to the other account where, in the broker or the booking system? Because again, I think it's two different, like how the broker models or the schema on the broker side for keeping track of who's a parent of who is one thing, and on the booking system side is a different thing, because you know, there's no restriction on the number of parents that a child can have. In our system, it could be, it's not even a restriction that they could only have two. They can be as many as you want, and that more closely matches reality, I think. So I definitely don't think that having some sort of artificial they can only have one. If there are booking systems that have that restriction, so be it, but that's for them to deal with internally, as opposed to from the broker side and from the open booking side. This person is dependent of this person. Do with that what you wish. And if, yeah, I don't know. I guess the problem then is, yeah, we're still getting situation. There's the possibility of the situation where they're out of sync, which is the whole issue here.
Well, is it? It seems like maybe is the use case we need to solve here literally, or the primary use case literally, the I've logged into Westminster and created Johnny, and my partner exists as well and is in the same group. My partner now logs into Manchester. What's the expectation? Can they see Johnny, and how does that work? Or do they need the I mean, I'm simplifying it to massively, and as a very specific use case. But if you've got parent 1, parent 2, and Johnny, and parent 1 is where Johnny is being parent 1 has created Johnny, and the question is, when you log into the second system as parent 2, can you see Johnny? As parent 1, can you see Johnny? And then if in the first system parent 1 and parent 2, you know, are no longer related to each other, what's the expectation in the second system? I mean, I mean, the easy route here would be just create another Johnny record and be done with it. We don't need that same Johnny to exist as the same record. But I know that from a data point of view, for example, I know everyone active is hot on not duplicating records. So I suppose that's the trade-off, isn't it, really? If every parent just created their own Johnny, then you'd have no problem.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if that runs afoul of safeguarding legislation, because in a sense, if Johnny's just an attendee, if he's a name and a date of birth, it's probably not a problem if you've got multiple Johnny entities running around. If it gets associated with, say, an email address, and you've got systems automatically pinging each other based on, or automatically pinging Johnny, and you've got that sort of autonomy for each parent to add Johnny in that way, then you could start creating problems, I think.
You mean if they can talk to each other's version of Johnny?
Well, meaning that if you've got a shared reference, so if you've got a shared communication reference, like a phone number or an email, and each parent can independently create a dependent account that exists associated only with that parent, and there's not really any way of syncing those. I suppose you could create a problem whereby, you know, parent 2, who's, say, not supposed to have any contact with Johnny, is able to kind of create that account and start making bookings for that child. That's like the potential hole in there. And I think this is really very much an edge case, but it's also a significant and serious edge case. And I think that's one scenario I'd like to rule out if we're going to simplify things.
Yeah, you'd have to remove, if there was a situation where parent 2 could no longer contact Johnny, that would, I imagine, be something that every system that would need to be updated for that to happen.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not unreasonable that MCR would need to be updated separately from the booking system in that case.
Yeah, well, I guess it's more about the capacity. A very simple system would allow that scenario to arise simply because Johnny was really only associated with parents and sort of only existed on the broker side. If you really stripped it back, you could end up with parents just able to create that entity. in a way that could potentially be problematic. I mean, you know, in that scenario, I suppose also it could be that you change the email account of the child and so on and so forth. But there's risks associated with really paring back the data held about the child and the extent to which it's independent of any other resource.
I suppose another option is that we just have the Johnny, now famous, is broker specific. Westminster has one version of Johnny, and all bookings through Westminster use that particular version of, and it's up to Westminster how that particular Johnny is linked to everyone. And not if you log into Manchester, there's no expectation that those two things are going to connect together. So you create that same child again in Manchester, and it's up to the broker to manage the life cycle of that child. So if that child gets deleted from the broker, there's an expectation that they would delete that child from the booking system, or at least GDPR, you know, erase the thing. So it's you're literally just creating an entity for the sake of making bookings through it.
I mean, I think that sounds viable. I guess, again, it's just something to check with MCR Active and Active Westminster that's makes sense from their perspective.
I'm just asking a really obvious question. Do we even need Johnny to exist? I mean, can we just not have a record? Do we need records for these? Because can they just be guests if they're under 8 years old? Because if they can just be guests if they're under 8 years old, then or whatever the age bracket is, then actually we don't have the problem anymore of these dependents that don't have accounts.
I guess, do you mean completely anonymous, or do you mean the attendee information is the only thing that we are filling for this particular person who's going to be turning up and taking part?
That's right. The attendee information is passed from the broker to the booking system every time there's a booking, but there's no expectation of the entity existing anywhere.
I think that makes sense. But
Go on, Karen, sorry.
no, I was just going to say, personally, I think that makes sense, but I don't think that I should be answering the question, really.
The only concern would be is that we're not going to capture emergency contact details in that case, are we?
So this would be the case where the primary is the adult. So you've got all the contact details of the primary person, and the adult's making the booking on behalf of the child. So we get, you know, full record details for the adult, and then the first name, surname, and whatever minimal details for the child are necessary to make the booking.
But if that adult doesn't exist on the leisure operator system,
sorry, the adult in this scenario, the adult would exist on leisure operator system. So the adult, so you know, parent one logs into MCR, they create their account, they sync up with Everyone Active. They've got an account in Everyone Active. Those accounts will match up. Great. Parent one wants to book for Johnny. Instead of us creating a record for Johnny and Everyone Active at that point, and then trying to worry about whose parent it is and all the rest of it, we just say, actually, all kids below whatever age that aren't accounts within either system are just treated as guests. So we just pass the details of Johnny, but we don't need to create a record for Johnny at that point.
but we don't know from a leisure operator system, we don't know who booked for Johnny. Therefore, we don't know who the emergency contact detail is for Johnny. And the only information we've got is the information that was submitted as part of the booking for that individual.
So the
And
booking
that wouldn't include emergency contact details, would it? It includes some contact details, but that's not necessarily an emergency contact detail, is it?
That's interesting. So does well, actually, that's a good point. But I guess we talked about the age that we'd need an emergency contact detail already. So maybe that's the same thing. Is the only reason they don't have emergency? Sorry, are we saying it's not sufficient to have an adult record associated with the child? It actually needs to be explicit emergency contact details.
Well, if you create, from my perspective, you've either got an adult record and a child record. They're associated with each other, and or against the child record, you've got emergency contact details. Yeah. In this case, we're saying we've got an adult record, we haven't got a child record, we're booking using the child. Therefore, if I just go to a booking sheet and look at who's booked at badminton court at that time, it's going to be that child. And the only information that I've got about that child is what was submitted as part of the guest booking, which wouldn't include emergency contact details. It wouldn't include anything. I wouldn't know who that parent is.
Because in Gladstone, that's not being stored.
Yeah,
It would
it's
be-
not stored for a guest booking, no.
So you would know who had made the booking from an API perspective, but Gladstone might not be persisting that. So you would know that, because the booking would be kind of the booker, the customer would be the adult, and the attendee would be the child. So you'd have both bits of details in the booking. Whether they're stored by Gladstone, I guess, is a separate question. But they would be.
I don't think that was discussed being stored as part of a guest booking. I think the guest booking was purely, we don't know who you are, and we're gonna hold the information that you provided at the time of booking for that individual booking for that individual, and that's going to be cleared out after a period of time.
Yes.
And anonymize, so you don't know who that child's associated to.
That's right. Yeah, that's it. The conversation with Gladstone was, yeah, absolutely, was basically store the attendee, not store the booker.
Hmm.
But so that would be a different. But I guess that's a Gladstone specific thing to think about, whether we just add a couple extra fields for storing the booker. But hang on. But away from the Gladstone, that's a very Gladstone specific implementation question. Does it solve the problem at a higher level, or is there? Do you know what I mean? I guess there are other reasons why we need to have a child account for those that are under 8.
Other than client requiring it, Nick, because clients are data hungry, aren't they, for all sorts of stats on all bookies and bookers.
Yeah.
So if they were happy with that, it doesn't bother me in the slightest. As long as linking back to Debbie's argument, as long as we have the ability to see who booked on behalf of a bookie in case of an emergency, then that would satisfy our needs. And if that was a primary associated with a dependent, that's fine. De facto, the primary is a emergency contact for a dependent, in our view.
Okay, so this is again something to run by MCR Active, that if they want a lot of reporting on 4 to 8 year olds, and we've removed how you capture that easily, that might be an issue for them.
Not just reporting, though. Dependent entitlements. Is that true? Well, you can still make
right. Okay, I see what you're saying.
dependent entitlement bookings would still be possible, but you would lose the.
You mean discounting entitlements?
I mean, junior walk-ins. Do I mean that? I mean, junior. Yeah, the walk-in scenario where a child that is under 8 years old has their own barcode and can walk in and use something.
That's a record.
That's a record, yeah. So that would be the thing that we wouldn't be able to do anymore.
Yeah.
For under 8. Is that, I don't know, is that a use case that's common? Is it important?
What's how we deliver free swimming?
Yes.
So you'd lose that.
Yeah. And that's a really big problem. That's a really big problem. Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Really big.
This is the problem we started with, isn't it?
Right, fine. All right, forget that. So don't worry, Debbie. It doesn't make any sense anyway. So there's no problem with that. Right, fine. So we're back to figuring out flipping heck who owns Johnny, and then that's the last issue, which I think exists in all cases, because even with the original plan we had to model this as groups, I suppose you've still got that situation where well, no, actually you haven't really, because the group tells you that. So yeah, okay. So it's basically we need to figure out either how to model who can who can reference Johnny. Sorry, we talked about a minute ago, the broker specific Johnny, is that an option that we would be happy with if clients were happy with it? Because obviously, from MCR and Westminster's perspective, they are the, broker, aren't they? So, if Johnny was created per broker, does that work?
How do you issue the barcode?
Well, it's a separate. If you did have an MCR card for Johnny, that would be a different barcode to the Westminster card for Johnny. They're just different records.
But sorry, so how does the Leisure
I don't
Center say recognize the barcode?
Because it's on the account. So in that scenario, we create so the broker creates the account for little Johnny, and it's totally up to the broker how that account is dealt with. It lives and dies with that broker. So it exists from a reporting perspective. It exists from a Gladstone build perspective. It exists from a junior walk-in perspective. All the reasons why we want that account to exist, but it only exists. But there are duplicates if we have if Johnny exists for multiple brokers.
Okay, yeah. I have run out of brain cells on that one.
We've gone quite far with it though. So
yeah, I'm a bit lost in the mire as well at the moment. I feel like because I still feel like there's two different things at play here, and they're getting slightly conflated, whereas keeping them separate. I thought I had an idea about it, but now I'm slightly lost again. But yeah, that's maybe just because we've been talking about it for so long, potentially.
Well, why don't we do this? Well, I could write up what we've got to as part of the issue I was going to write up anyway, with the options it sounds like we've got on the table, the disadvantages of. Sounds like we've ruled out some on the basis of reporting already, and so what we'll hopefully be left with is 2 or 3 clear options that we can discuss next time, and then I guess propose to the client when we know what actually works.
Okay. So if you can write up those options, that would be good. It sounds like it would be premature. Well, do we need further input from the clients to resolve this? Would that help rule out some options if we had greater specificity in requirements?
We've already established we need reporting.
Yeah.
We need
I'm just
junior
wondering if there's
walk-in.
anything else that might bite us.
I guess we could ask the clients, do they want the sync at all? That seemed like the big one, wasn't it? Do they mind if the groups that exist in MCR are totally different to the groups that exist in Everyone Active?
Yeah, I think probably what they'd come to think of it, what the response to that would probably be, well, what are the implications of them being unsynced? And then we'd actually have to have all of those options mapped out anyway for that. So let's proceed without talking to the clients in the first instance. We've got a complete technical landscape. And then we can do that consultation exercise as a sense checking exercise, hopefully after the fact. So yeah, if you could raise that issue on GitHub and I guess ping it into the Slack channel. Once that's done, that would be a good first step.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, it does. I think I agree with Matt that yeah, there's a groups and there's a dependence kind of conversation, and it's not clear to me how much those are intersecting and how much they're separate concerns that need to be addressed. So that would be one point that I hope will emerge with more clarity. Okay, we still have 20 minutes on the call actually, and I think I suspect D10 and G are probably not will probably not have too many actions attached to them, but let's just jump there. There we go.
Sorry, quick question before we move on. There were 3 reasons why a record was required for our under 8-year-old that we talked about. Junior walk-ins and reporting were 2 of them. What was the 3rd? Does anyone remember?
It was access, wasn't it? Things like free swimming.
Access for free swimming. Yeah. And that was it. Nothing else. Okay.
Yeah, that's it, I think.
Great, thank you. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, please carry on. That's good.
I think carrying on was going to be mostly reverting to you again, Nick. So this is the customer accounts Rpde. So having a special feed just for customer accounts to reduce polling, basically. And this was added in on December the 9th. So it's been around for a while. So the point is just to flag, okay, I've updated this account on the booking system side, and that means the broker then has a trigger to go look for those updates, query for those updates. Is that a good summary, Nick?
Yeah, so I think the history of this, yeah, exactly. The history of this issue was that there is, because barcodes can be set on the broker, on the booking system side, someone walks into the center, gets given a card, and other things can happen as well that require checking the account to see if everything's changed. I think barcodes and entitlements being changed or expiring, and something else. There are a few reasons why things might be updated. In the previous call, I think maybe towards the end of one of the calls, we talked about the idea that might create a load of polling on the booking system if there's checking of that happening. And although that load might be minor compared to other calls that are happening, I mean, for context, I know that MWS, it's in the Gladstone system, within clients I've been in, the number of calls that are made to the APIs are absolutely enormous for general kind of making bookings and things like that. So this would be a very, very small fraction. We're talking about 0.1% of calls required to poll this compared to the volume of calls that are happening anyway. But nonetheless, it's additional load on the servers, even if it's a very small amount of load. And so, the conversation was, well, we could remove that load even more by having a feed where you can check for changes, and those changes would be available in the feed. So obviously the operational cost of the additional hits to the database there is trading off against the build cost of building a feed that is then being used. So it's a feature that we could have in as an optional feature potentially for those systems that want to implement it and feel the cost is worth that. Or we make it as a kind of more core feature that is expected to be implemented alongside other things. Yeah.
So, Nick, what's the authorization kind of scope here? I see bearer token obtained by OpenID Connect. So is that the bearer token for a particular customer?
No, it's client credentials flow. So you're getting a feed of all customer IDs across the broker that have given permission to the broker.
Right. So it's the same authorization essentially that we use for the orders feed. Am I right?
Yeah.
Right. So we keep a track of all of the users who have connected their account and then just pump any changes for that down this feed. So The barest, I mean, at the moment, because we're using API authentication, API key authorization for the broker. So I presume the authorization, that authorization would be valid here as well.
Well, because we're using OAuth for the whole of the memberships anyway, it might
But
be.
that's on a customer by customer basis, right?
Oh, I see. Yes, it is. That's true. But then if you've already got the infrastructure for customer by customer, then client credentials is kind of a built-in part of that. So it might be.
Well, yes and no, in that there is no real way for a broker to log in per se, other than at the moment presenting their API key. So it's additional functionality there, I think.
So the client credentials flow doesn't require a login screen. It's just another way of saying this is it is an API key.
Right.
Client
Okay.
credentials flow is literally just client ID, client secret. That's it.
Right.
So there's yeah, it's
Okay.
it's API key done with OAuth words.
Fine. Fine.
So any existing infrastructure that would support API keys would support this.
So I guess the assumption here is that velocity for changes on customer accounts is pretty slow. Any individual customer account is going to change annually, biannually. I suppose I guess the question is whether this should be optional, as you said, Nick, or whether this should be mandatory. I worry that if we make it optional, it's just going to be more of a pain for brokers that are now they're like, well, am I polling? Am I hitting this endpoint, or am I doing both? And if I feel like having to branch is kind of annoying.
Yeah.
And if it's the case that across all systems, velocity for customer changes is really slow, I can't think why you wouldn't prefer to implement this. Like it's because it seems like the implementation cost, the build cost would be low in any event. So I think my own tip would be toward making this mandatory if you're implementing memberships rather than optional. But I don't know how other people on the call feel about that.
If it were optional, we wouldn't do it. Is the honest answer, really?
No?
Because no, I'm agreeing with you, and at the expense of it's going to be more work for us because we're going to have to build this additional fee. But because you're right, if it's set as optional, we wouldn't do it. And then you're right, there's the broker has to decide, okay, I've got a poll for this system, but I can use the Rpde. So yeah, agreeing with what you're saying, basically.
Any thoughts, Stephen?
No, nothing to add on that because Matthew's comments sounded logical to me.
Right. Okay. Any thoughts, Debbie?
I'm trying to recall the last conversation we had about this, and it was on the last call, and I think we suggested using a feed because it's something that exists from a Gladstone perspective. So we've got other third parties that already pick up that member record has been updated in the operator system, therefore they need to update their data off the back of that. If I'm honest, I can't remember the reason why we suggested it, but I think it was because there was an alternative method being proposed for retrieving or updating customer accounts, and I can't remember what the original proposal was, which made this one seem more like a nicer approach, if you know what I mean. So if we compare the original proposal to this, then which is the better approach?
So the original one, I think, Debbie, was the polling was that the broker would check every account every day.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Which seems quite horrendous when you say it like that. So
Yeah.
from my perspective, the feed as it's something that exists and that we use with other third parties feels the more sensible approach. That you get told when something's been updated and you retrieve that information and update it.
Presumably, the other potential option is a webhook of some sort, which was discounted for some reason previously, I guess. Nick, I'm kind of asking.
Yeah, that's right. The webhooks, because with webhooks, well, there's two issues. Webhooks require a bigger infrastructure to implement because you've got all the retries and all the other stuff and testing around that. And the booking system needs to take on some burden over the states of the different brokers. And also a fallback mechanism is usually required with webhooks anyway to catch things that are missed if the webhooks are down for any period of time, unless there's, you know, huge, even with queuing infrastructure, the webhooks at some point would stop, I guess. So you need some way of retrieving the current state before waiting for webhooks, in which case you basically end up building the feed. You're kind of at that point, you might as well just use the feed anyway. It's the kind of bit of logic.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, should we just retain this as part of the spec then, and make it standard, mandatory, essentially?
Yep, I'll write it on the issue. Sounds good.
Good.
And I think it's good to have this conversation because it means that if there's pushback from any system about the extra bit of effort, there's been a bit of a discussion about this being important and why it's included and why the scope is increased. Because every time the scope increases, everyone goes, "Oh my goodness, the scope's increased." So, but it sounds like it's increasing for good reason.
The only query I have is just because it's not something that exists at the moment, but how we would identify that the broker's been given permission to get the information for those individuals to reduce the feed down, if you know what I mean. So you would only want in the feed the people that have been set up in MCR or Westminster. It's just what it would be that we would use from a database perspective on our side to identify those individuals.
It's a really good question. So if you were using Identity Server 4, as I think Gladstone and all these sports are likely to use because it's .NET, then there is a table that exists in there, which is the grants that are given to particular users. So it's a join of that table against the client ID of the broker, which is that it comes in with this API call. So you know the client ID because it comes in with the client credentials flow. It's validated by the middleware, and then you're just in the database. You're just joining client ID that's come in to the grants table, which says which users that client can access. And then when you get to you've got the user ID or member ID, you can use the member ID to filter.
So is that something that can be captured in here? Because that it goes over my head. This is why I need Gladstone on the call, because some of this stuff is far too technical for my ability. But I wouldn't have known that, and so I guess coming at it from that perspective and reading this document, there's nothing there that tells me that that's how that would work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I have a note in there to that effect. Yeah.
Thank you.
Nice.
Okay. Thanks, Nick. And then finally, Appendix G, OpenID Connect. And I think this is really just walking through how OpenID Connect works. I mean, is there original content in here, or is this really for reference?
This is a section that's not fully complete by the looks of things, at the end of it at least.
I guess this is implementation guidance, I suppose.
Yeah, so it probably is worth just being clear on what profile of OpenID Connect we're talking about using, which is the bog standard one. And there's no, because OpenID Connect's got loads of frilly bits around it. We're not using any of those frilly bits, I don't think. So it's just using the basic stuff. And also some notes about the consent screen, that could be used, and guidance around the kind of thing that might be useful to present there. For example, in OpenID Connect clients, you need to, in OpenID Connect IDPs, what are they called? Identity providers. You need to specify the names of each of the permissions. So it might be worth us just including guidance for those names so that everybody uses roughly the same thing and doesn't confuse users. Things like, making bookings on behalf of other people and accessing your customer information and things like that. Maybe not as requirements, just because it might be slightly different between systems, but so there's something in there.
Sure, but it is in the realm of guidance. So changes to this section will not impose any additional requirements on implementing systems. This is very much a help, really, for people to implement.
Yeah, that's right. This is it exactly. This is like there's a specific. Oh, actually, you know what? I just said there's no frilly bits used. There is one bit of frilliness used, which is in the logout section. That's what that reference is. And so that's just saying that the broker initiated logout is available. And that's just so that if you log out of MCR, that also logs you out of Everyone Active or whatever. If you've logged in through one, it'll log you out. Yeah, that's not apart from that, I don't think. And that's also something that's built into Identity Server 4 as a default thing. So that's not a very onerous addition.
Okay. Yep. It's a tantalizing end there.
Yes. Oh yeah, this is achieved by Identity Server 4, right? I think we pasted in the documentation link that says it's in. Yeah, that's what's missing there. But that's probably not. I mean, Identity Server 4 probably doesn't need to go in the spec. That's just guidance again.
This is really picking a way through, isn't it? The OpenID.
Yeah, that's right. It's almost because OpenID can be big, and there's a very narrow bit that we're using of it, and so it's kind of really being clear on what that bit is. But yeah, there's no additional complexity here, I don't think.
Okay. Well, we've got 3 minutes left on the call. So outstanding really is a little requirements gathering on facility bookings and some issue write-ups with sections 9. Well, dependent accounts. We need to clarify the issues, I guess, and hopefully the path is a lot clearer once that's done. Other than that, with admittedly that large quicksand there potentially opening up, but other than that, we have gone through the entire document. So congratulations at the at the ultra marathon. So we'll revisit a couple of selected issues, but past that point, it's about Nick and I getting together to finalize that document, final review, and then getting it into a self-standing spec that people can act on. So with the significant exceptions of sections 9 and 10, I'll just say in the final couple of minutes, is there any other business that people would like to raise at this point? Okay, shake of the head from Matt.
Sorry, just on what we just said there about dependent accounts and that issue that I'm writing up. When is that due for that conversation? Is that next week?
I think ideally, yeah. I mean, it's
fine.
I really do think everything else, most of the I's have been dotted and the T's have been crossed, sometimes a bit messily and illegibly. So we do need to, get it down so that people can properly review it. But I think we really are almost there. So if we can get that for discussion next week, that would be fantastic.
Great. Is it worth seeing if Gladstone's around for that call, Debbie, next week?
Which call are we talking about? The Wednesday one?
Thursday,
or...
I think.
Yeah, I think a week from today. Yeah.
Oh, it'll be a week today, will it? Yeah, I've already sent a note over to Andrew Marshall. I've been on this call to see what's happening with Andy still.
Okay, great. Hopefully we can get them on the call and hopefully sign it off or at least establish a clear direction. Okay, thank you very much to everybody on the call. And yeah, arriving at 2:30 like a laser. So perfect. Okay. Thanks a lot and see you next week.
Thanks all. Bye, everybody.
Guys.
Cheers, bye.
Bye.